Okay. So the agenda for today would be like talk a bit about my proposal, or it's not a proposal, it's more a draft of my ideas. Then Jamie wanted to say something about her Wikipedia experience and moderation there. Tim had an idea, had something he wanted to present, and then we can continue with Ysaurus' current challenges and approaches. So who had the time to look into my document yet?
I took a look.
Yeah, I read some comments about, from Jean, and there was a little discussion in Slack. But like in general, you get, I think you get now what I'm thinking about. Like it's a very generic thing. It's not about argumentation specifically. It's really about anything. Yeah. Any more comments on that? That direction, is that a direction that makes sense to you guys?
I have a general comment. There's a lot to like about this. It's very good for a community that has a self-contained sense of purpose. I don't think it's so good for a diverse community, because the danger of people opposing one another on ideological basis and hence destroying, blocking one another is not handled by this scenario. That said, it's a very good scenario for, say, internal to the community that has a shared sense of purpose. And I think it is worth pursuing that. I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all process for any community, whether homogeneous or diverse. And this is a good homogeneous process.
I'm wondering, like, okay, I thought it was specifically for people who don't agree and to vote something through. But more on
interesting.
Agreeing not on arguments themselves, but on the change. Like, should this argument be added or changed or whatever? It's more about the meta level.
See, in a good faith community where people disagree, but are willing to let each person do their thing, it could work very well. What I'm afraid of is in a bad faith community where people start blocking something because it comes from the other side, right? And then it gets a negative score. This is the case that I'm worried is not handled.
Okay, so similar to, hi Stephen, similar to edit wars on Wikipedia that Jamie mentioned, something like that. Yeah. Any ideas how to tackle that?
Well, I do. Okay. I think that the notion, for me, I would tend to go for polyphonic, right? Saying that any given topic can have, here's the viewpoint of this party and that party and maybe that other party. It doesn't have to be binary, but having multiple presentation, and or maybe have a mechanism where there is an incentive for consensus view. And I would say have that separate from the quote unquote party lines. And incentive for consensus view would be a bit different logistic. It's not about saying you lose points if your change is refused, but you gain points if you manage to get everybody to agree, right? Including people who disagree. So this is a very different incentive structure. Getting a description of something that both sides can agree on would get incentivized. If the sizes can be identified, which often they can with, clustering of opinion otherwise.
But to me, it seems like you're talking about agreeing on content and not on changes or refinement of content. Like,
what I'm saying is, in a bad faith community, people will block refinement of content because they disagree on content. That's the point of the bad faith community. And if there's very negative scoring for refused change, that makes it easy for one party to destroy the reputation of the other party. I see that as a gaming strategy.
If both parties are similarly strong. Right?
A good,
Yeah.
I mean, in our system, you know, ideally the content arguments are being made in the form of claims, and then moderators are helping claims being shaped in the way that they should to fit the format. And a good moderator is going to help people on both sides of the argument. But inevitably moderators are going to have a certain type of power, and there's going to be a way they can wield their kind of soft power that helps nudge certain sides of the argument and the whole system to work. I'm Mark Cantuan. I'm trying to just, I think, say what you're after in a little bit of a different way. In order for the system to work well, the moderators need to do a really good job of being supportive to everyone who's arguing and not try to favor a side. And so how does our system encourage that and then stop it when a moderator does use their power in the way that they shouldn't in these kind of soft ways?
Is that the Chialo model?
Sorry?
Isn't that the Chialo model? Chialo allows people to crowdsource contributions, but they have a team of moderators who help improve how argumentation is structured from all sides.
Sort of the general web model, right? And
Yeah, sure.
Are we talking about scenarios here where we have moderators or don't have moderators? Felix, it seemed like your model was more targeted towards the general use case of not having moderation.
And this is why I was trying to introduce a scoring system where getting modifications approved by both parties improves your score. And maybe we should separate that score as being a good moderator versus, you know, a good moderator will get stuff that's acceptable to everybody. And that's the moderation score, as opposed to the contribution score, which can have a different logic.
How do you
moderate the moderators?
Parties?
What?
How do you define both parties?
I'm saying this would make sense in the case where there's also a score for agreement, disagreement for different proposals. So we can use that to identify clusters of similar opinions. So if a change is approved by people with different who support and don't support a specific content, then we know we have achieved a certain level of, you know, neutrality.
Yeah, assuming that one side doesn't put one of their team members to disagree with them, so they get the ability to approve changes.
No, that's true. That's true. It's gainable too. But the question is the impact of, what is the impact of this approval, right? I mean, what is the incentive? Like if somebody cheats that way, that's also supporting the other side and could turn against them.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like as I understand it right now, that the reputation you gain when you moderate stuff, like when you when your changes are accepted and when you help people work together, then your reputation grows. So basically the reputation score is kind of a moderation score, because if a lot of people disagree with your changes, then you won't have a high score. But if like both opposing sides agree with your changes, then your score is high.
That is true. My problem with the proposal, and I do understand why you have this, is that it's easier to destroy a score than to build it, right? By design.
Right. Yes.
And so I could see that's almost a problem for moderators. Like, does it become a strategy to attack the moderator to block in your changes? And I think one thing you've done, by the way, is you've made it very explicit that a solution to that may be community forking. And again, I think that's a perfectly valid solution to create more unified communities, good faith communities who have enough alignment on goals that they can work out their differences. The question is, what do you do at the next stage when you want to reunite those, and where the good faith is absent? I think it cannot be the same strategy for good faith and bad faith argument.
Tim, you seem to disagree. Maybe respond.
One of the main goal of the canonical debate is to be canonical, which means any proposal that results in bifurcating debate around different communities runs entirely counter to that.
Is this a canonical debate moderation suggestion? I thought it was sort of like a broader one, Felix.
It's broader, yeah. It's more general one because I'm exploring the space right now, like what might fit for the canonical debate, for example. But also I'm very the distributed approach. I'm very inspired by Marc-Antoine's distributed approach, but that's why I introduced the whole community concept in there. But yeah, I understand Timothy's concerns that like it's not canonical anymore in that way. Like you basically say, okay, if there's no consensus, split, which might not be a good idea actually.
I share that.
I think if we allow split, we have to find a way to do the merge, basically. And for me, what I'm saying is the logic of the merge need not be the same as the intra-community logic. And yeah, when we're dealing with bad faith modifications, I'm not sure this totally works. I may be wrong. I see what you're saying about building a moderator. How would we distinguish those? I mean, that's a real good question, right? You've been doing these simulations. Can we distinguish bad faith attacks from good faith, the impact of bad faith attacks in those simulations? I'm not sure, but it's a good question.
Maybe we can bridge to Wikipedia and go a bit more into practical stuff. Maybe Jamie, because you mentioned the edit wars, is that something we can learn from?
Yeah. So firstly, I want to say that in your document, Felix, specific types of changes requiring a minimum reputation score, it's very similar to Wikipedia. Certain pages are protected if they're trolled often, and you have to have a certain number of edits in order to make those changes. So there is like a reputation mechanism in Wikipedia, and it has to do with the time you've been on the site, even though that's not a hard calculation, but it definitely has an impact when it comes to wiki wars and governance conversations, which I'll get into a little bit later. But there is actually like a hard-coded metric of you needing a certain amount of edits in order to make edits on certain things. And I think that's a good thing. Wiki wars, so the thing to understand about Wikipedia is that in many instances, a lot of the pages are considered high stakes because Wikipedia gets a lot of attention. There's an automatic sampling bias with Wikipedians because it takes a certain type of person to want to go and edit Wikipedia, and any type of crowdsourcing effort at all is going to get that kind of bias. You're going to attract a certain type of person. And while that may end up being a good thing, if it's a low stakes project, right, like before Canonical Debate Labs gets a lot of attention, it may be low stakes. So you could be attracting people who actually do have a sincere interest in good argumentation. But as it becomes increasingly popular, it's going to become increasingly politicized, and people will want to participate because they're trying to shape a narrative. And you see that a lot on Wikipedia. So wiki wars are essentially real-time wars between editors that are battling to shape the front page of an encyclopedia entry or a Wikipedia entry. And oftentimes it's happening during some kind of event. So like I got into a wiki war about a documentary that was going viral because this other editor was being super freaking biased. And so he and I, like literally second by second, were just edited back and forth. I think to a certain extent, Felix, you've accounted for that in terms of, you losing reputation or, getting reputation scores. So if it happens to be like a protected page and you need a certain amount of reputation in order to participate, wiki wars going back and forth may eventually kick those two people out. So that may work. But for pages where there isn't minimum reputation, essentially the person who has the most time in the day wins. And unfortunately, that causes good editors who may not have as high a reputation to quit. Or it causes Wikipedians with more time on their hands and more reputation to become tyrannical. I've talked to other Wikipedians about how like good wiki editors who've been a part of the platform for a long time will get fed up with people making edits that are contrary to their political interests, and they'll just kind of start dominating pages. The recourse for this on Wikipedia is on the talk pages. So on every single Wikipedia entry that you're on, you can click on the talk page. And essentially the talk page is the timeout section where the editors go to resolve their conflicts. So anyone can look at a talk page and see the editors talking. So for the particular wiki war that I was in, that I got so mad at, I rage quit Wikipedia. I'm back now because I love Wikipedia. But on the talk page, you know, it's a bunch of editors talking about like, this is so biased. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's clearly biased. We got sent there. It was like a soft governance call by someone who just had a greater reputation than we do. So editors who've been around for a long time can also earn different kinds of badges. And that's the very soft kind of indicator of their reputation. There is a formal process to getting banned from the platform. So the governance model is the threat of being banned. And the threat of being banned, if I'm not mistaken, is the only actual formal governance process to determine a decision, like to make a decision on what edits are actually done. Otherwise, it's just who has more time in the day to withstand the wiki war. And sometimes it doesn't even get resolved on talk pages. So the governance structure of Wikipedia is a little soft until it gets to the point of you're being threatened to be banned. And in many ways, it can be very disincentivizing for good editors who are getting frustrated by people who simply have more time in the day. There are other things I wanted to say. One of the challenges with Wikipedia that you could learn from in your community moderation is the onboarding. Wikipedia doesn't really have an amazing onboarding program. You kind of stumble through it. Its instructions are in its own format. So if you're not used to the format's not easy for you to understand or read. You know, a lot of people who would make great Wikipedia editors simply don't make it because they don't have an amazing onboarding. So I would just recommend that any group here that's interested in stewarding a community has a proper onboarding platform, program, whatever. The other thing about Wikipedia that I think anyone interested in community moderation could learn from is that Wikipedia has a series of banners that indicate the quality of the encyclopedia page. I love this. I think this context is really important to form the appropriate impression of the information people are about to see. It'll say things like, this came from one source, it's an essay, it's written like it's from a personal point of view, like it essentially all these flags that are at the top of articles that let people know the quality of the article isn't up to standard. As far as I know, I don't know if this is true because I'm not like a hired Wikipedian, I'm just a volunteer Wikipedian. As far as I know, there's no formal process to find a pipeline that organizes all of these things. So these things could become higher priority. Like my interest would be, if possible, can I filter things per my interest? Can I filter things based on certain tags? Like, if things need more sources, how can I easily find that? And as far as I know, Wikipedia doesn't have a pipeline for volunteers to sift through and prioritize things when it may be my interest to make the knowledge base better as opposed to argue for a specific thing. So that may be of interest to y'all as well. And then the last thing I think I wanted to talk about was link decay. The Internet Archive is an amazing organization that I love, and they've been working with Wikipedia. They've created a bunch of bots and spiders to crawl through Wikipedia and create permanent links of all of the links to sources that Wikipedians building the pages have, linked to, and creating a permanent link. Because what happens is someone links to a news article and then something changes with the URL, the link decays, there's a source being referenced, but no one can find it. And that just is poor knowledge management. And so the Internet Archive, which creates a backup of the internet, is backing up all of Wikipedia's links. So there's a permalink, so millions of sources and there's a permanent centralized in one place. So I'd recommend that early on, y'all work to incorporate the Internet Archive API to automatically back things, so you don't have to deal with the same problem, because the Internet Archive certainly has enough to do than save everyone's websites. And so I think that's the extent of what I wanted to say, and feel free to ask questions.
When you were on that
Thanks.
wiki, is that something that like the process to escalate that and basically lock you guys out, is that automatic, or like that another moderator needs to?
There's not even really a moderator. Essentially, we were just told by an editor who has been around for longer than us, like, hey, you guys better go to the talk page and sort this out. So there's no formal governance or judicial structure. As far as I know, there's no formal governance or judicial structure at the low level of wiki wars. There's only threat, which is like, so there's only threat and expectation of like, you're supposed to talk about these on the talk pages. Even though by the time I went to the talk page, I already saw that all these other editors had been talking about bias for a while. It seemed as though there was consensus that this one editor was being super duper biased, but instead of me correcting it, I have to go to the talk page. And then like this moderator's threatening me, and there's no formal recourse for appealing the situation, like until it gets to the point where someone needs to be banned. So to me, I found the governance and judicial structure unsatisfactory, and that's what caused me to rage quit and stop donating to Wikipedia. But you know, just
That sounds
rage
shitty.
stuff. I've been back, you know, because I love Wikipedia. I think it's like one of the most important knowledge resources. But I did start donating all the money I donated to Wikipedia to the Internet Archive. But yeah, so just like a heads up, like to make people feel as though they're not being run over by someone who lives in their mom's basement, there probably should be some sort of formal judicial structure or recourse that's not necessarily penalizing, but allows people to you know, be guided by certain principles. And maybe this is something that can be accomplished with a moderator. But if there's something to be accomplished by a moderator, then you need to have really strong principles. Wikipedia does have strong principles. I believe I linked to it last time we all had a talk. Last time I was on, I linked to Wikipedia's principles about neutrality and blah, blah, blah. So yeah.
Thanks, Jamie, for sharing that. That's all really interesting to hear. I'd love to hear, Stephen, you've had a lot of experience moderating at Stack Exchange, and I'd love to hear your response to the issues that Jamie talked about.
Well, I can do
How it
it in a
differs.
bit. I actually had a question myself. I can share my experience with Stack Exchange moderation after, well, to the degree that I'm allowed to, because I'm actually not allowed to talk. Well, you sign like an agreement when you sign up as a moderator, so it's not fully public. So maybe, yeah. But then again, they're also fairly transparent. But I wonder to which degree Wiki was applied to editing wars in argument maps, because in a way, I think argument maps would encourage people to agree to disagree, and that disagreement would be expressed as opposed to Wikipedia, where you would edit it out. So I would hope that there's less problem with people disagreeing. That's the whole point. We want to map disagreement. So it really have to be bad faith actors that like start generating 20 opposing arguments that are totally flawed or based on basically non-arguments.
I think that's true in an ideal situation, but I can speak to my own experience just as a user on Kialo and dealing with a moderator who just fundamentally did not understand the claims I was making. And, you know, maybe my frustration was less that this moderator was on the other side of the issue than this moderator didn't seem to be the sharpest tool in the shed or something.
What was the resulting action of that moderator?
Me walking away.
No, the in terms of the content you added, what did the moderator
do? My claim was not being accepted because this person didn't fundamentally didn't understand. It was like about free speech, something about, you know, the regulation on free speech, and I was making a point that like there's lots of regulation on speech in America already. Like you can't say anything you want, and the person just didn't, you know, fire in a crowded theater. Like it didn't understand, and my claim was not accepted. And so I'm like, I'm not going to spend time on this, you know. And so it's just in the ideal, we will have, all of us would have ideally like the discussion of content is separate from the discussion of moderation, but it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be.
It's an interesting example because I think it overlaps with the discussions we've been having recently with vague claims and more precise claims. And what do you do with vague claims? Do you shut them down? Do you remove them? Do you lock in the conversation? Do you guide the conversation to more precise claims? And indeed, if the platform does not allow more vague claims that people might not understand or misinterpret, then indeed you might be shutting out people. So that's why I personally am always like, well, if the claim makes sense to one person, let's have a discussion about it. Doesn't mean that you can't still allow more specific discussions as well. But we don't have to go into that right now. From a moderation sense, the reason I raised the comparison with WikiWars is the more you allow discussion, the less you have to moderate, the less you have to agree on to allow to be moderated, if you will. So it would be interesting to think about what are concrete cases where you expect like bad faith actors to act in an argument map, and what would that look like? And I like the example you gave, Joshua, because it instantly gives like, well, the way I would deal with it, I wouldn't disallow claims like that to be added in the first place. So
yeah, I think what I ran up against was not bad faith, but rather blind spots. And all moderators will have blind spots. And so the reason I bring it up, I feel like it relates to what Jamie's talking about. And I feel like some of what we've been circling around is like, how do we moderate the moderators, or how do we appeal? Like, what is the system for that?
So, yeah, this is one of the primary directives, main principles of the canonical debate white paper, which is include everyone. And by that, specifically, I mean, make sure that people see their contributions getting accepted, because of exactly what you're talking about. One is frustration of just people not understanding you or whatever. The other bigger risk is people thinking there's censorship in keeping out ideas. And the whole point of making something canonical is no one can feel like they're being alienated, right?
I can share a bit on the Stack Exchange perspective in that regard. I mean, Stack Exchange is community moderation. That means if you're a moderator on the Stack Exchange website, in the best case scenario, you don't have to do anything. When the community moderation thing works, like when questions are put on hold, it's the community that does that. Like as a moderator, even you shouldn't jump like, oh, this question is obviously out of scope. You should allow the community, for example, to accumulate the 5 close votes by all people that have enough reputation to cast close votes on a question, rather than jumping on it. The only reason a moderator basically would step in is when there's problematic responses. It's attracting a lot of bad content, or your community doesn't have enough activity yet for bad content to be closed down on time. Stuff like that. Otherwise, the general rule is try to do as little as possible, really. Only step in if you have to moderate moderators in a way, if you just said so yourself. If there's like some extensive disagreement on whether or not content is acceptable, it's the community moderators, and in this case, people like me that have been around for 5, 6, 7 years, that understand the community, and they know like from previous content that has been added in the past, whether or not the community as a whole, if everyone were to be present at the same time, what would be the consensus opinion of like the community as a whole over this longer duration.
Hold on, I'm sorry, yeah, after Stephen is Mark Antoine. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so in a way, it is moderators that moderate moderators in a Stack Exchange model.
I think there's a big distinction to be had between content moderation and quote unquote form moderation. Like if somebody gives a very biased account, like in Wikipedia has a goal of neutral point of view, so of course you want to avoid that. Whereas I would, when I said, you know, choral, I would see a space on the Wikipedia page. Here is what these people say, and here's what those people say. And you can, instead of banning someone, say your edits are restricted to this sandbox of your own opinion, and then we can have them side by side. And here's an attempt at neutrality, which would be a separate thing, right? But not about banning the extreme views, but about containing them, which is different. But this is all about content extremes, as opposed to the slightly distinct task, but there's always going to be gray areas of logical distinction. Like when somebody says something hard to understand, okay, can you clarify this for me? When somebody says, gives a bogus argument, which is an obvious non sequitur, and like, can you explain, or if it's in bad faith, like actually penalize non sequiturs or totally illogical arguments and obvious gaming as opposed to extreme positions, right? Which is a very distinct problem, like sabotaging the structure. Again, I don't know if the rules are necessarily the same for handling extreme content on the one hand, which we want to, and I agree with Tim here that we have to include somehow, versus really destructive edits, either in the form of non sequiturs or spurious content or very unclear, or even, of course, removal. But I mean, I think I'm very much on record as saying nothing should ever be removed up to a point, only, but in some cases hidden, because this is clearly clearer than that. And being able to filter out something that's been replaced by something much clearer, I think is necessary, because otherwise we'll have overload. And that's maybe that's yet again a separate issue, right? What happens when you clarify something? What happens to the past version? The past version, if it's clarified by being more precise, well, we still need the imprecise version, because maybe the imprecise version has another interpretation. And that's the other conversation we had. Let's not go there now. Whereas, you know, something wasn't clear, replaced by something that's supposed to be equivalent but clearer, then we really want to filter out the old version. But anyway,
Joshua,
the distinction, go.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can finish.
No, I just wanted to insist that what I really want us to focus on is there such a thing as a distinction between extreme content and pure logic hogwash? Or is that something I imagine? And is that something that would warrant different rules?
Well, I can, maybe you go first, Jamie.
I just wanted to ask a question about different rules. So Joshua, if the moderator that you were interacting with instead like hit a button that says, can you clarify this? Because I don't understand, as opposed to rejecting your claim, do you think you would have felt like a sense of justice and that you had recourse to, you know, appeal to, that would ultimately lead you to staying on the platform?
If the moderator had asked me to clarify?
Yeah, if they sent you back something saying, hey, I'm not understanding this, can you clarify, as opposed to rejecting your claim?
They might have. It was a while ago. I think that like they said, you know, no, it wasn't just this has been rejected with no explanation. They said something, okay. I responded, and then they responded again, and you know, it was like what I wanted was to like speak to a manager. You know, yeah. Like I wanted to like, can I have a different moderator? You know, because I'd responded twice. And I'm not trying to, you know, paint myself as being you know, a pain. Was I a difficult user? I'm not sure. Maybe I was, but I also want to be like honest about how I felt with it, because how I felt in that scenario is how users of our platforms will feel, right? So how does it gave me an insight into how does the user feel when faced with a moderator who's not getting them, and what can be offered to the user in that situation. And I didn't see anything plainly available that was offered to me to do about this.
So I can share what happens on Stack Exchange. And I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the Q&A websites, but similar to Wikipedia, where you have the talk pages, each Stack Exchange site has a meta page. And typically when a moderator would shut down a question because it's off topic, that's the most common reason people ask all kinds of questions, but well, not everything is in scope of a certain website. You would simply explain this is off scope. If you think it is, just open the question in meta, or you link them directly to previous discussions where the same discussion was held, whether or not this should be on and off scope, because it is a community effort to determine what falls within the scope of these websites. So if Kialo doesn't have any mechanism like that, indeed, that is a shortcoming. You need to be able to be heard. If you want to be part of a community, you also need to have be able to discuss that community you're trying to be part of. And that should be transparent. And that's where the meta pages come in.
Yeah, they might have it, and they might have it, and there just wasn't a link to it in the thing I was looking at in that moment, you know, like, and I did not have the energy to go dig for it.
Well,
or
they
maybe
didn't have it in
doesn't develop.
2017, I know, but I haven't been in Kialo in ages. Yeah, so even if questions get closed, people are always invited to chat or to, if they keep like commenting and they have problems, we just invite them to a different forum offsite of the main content. We pick up the discussion there. And towards Marc-Antoine, yes, there's a major distinction between bad faith actors and just content that might be by good faith actors. We always assume good intent. Like if it is possible that somebody posted something, maybe with a link to their blog, don't just assume they're like advocating their own websites and whatsoever. They might actually have a blog post that's relevant and they have a question about it and etc. Then just edit out the link, etc. Like we always assume good intent, but when you see obvious spam, when you see obvious trolling or whatsoever, that's when you start investigating the individual behavior for one particular account in detail, and that's when that behavior can lead to suspensions of account.
That faith is usually pretty obvious. No, I was more interested in the distinction between bias and breach of logic. Breach of neutrality versus breach of logic, which are different.
Breach of logic is allowed, right? Because you're allowed to make fallacies and map them out and then argue.
Yeah,
why.
but I think I should be able to flag somebody who makes illogical arguments differently than somebody who makes biased arguments.
Maybe you have to clarify what you mean by illogical arguments, because I'm not
non sequiturs are a good example.
Okay, yeah, like, non sequitur. But how do you know it's truly a non sequitur without trying to understand the argument better, right?
I totally agree. I think that everybody should be entitled to an interpretation negotiation. But I mean, sometimes it's like the person is just not making sense. It happens. I mean, my experience of this, or indirect experience of this, was the Mark Klein's experiment with IBIS-based conversation on climate change ages ago. And what he was not going to hit on illogical, but like it was about, are people at least respecting the basic IBIS format? The basic, IBIS being issue, proposal, pro and con. And people asking question as an argument, or or vice versa. It's this is not about illogical, it's about not respecting the format. And so everything that was entered actually went through a moderator who would go through, is this following the format? Yes, no. And from what I saw from the resulting graph, which was huge, they were fairly lenient, but they did go through a process in some cases of saying, this is not a question. This is, make an argument here instead of asking a question, or vice versa, because it's too obviously one or the other, or separate it or whatever, right? It's about, it's not illogical, it's about just not following the format. And I think that mastery of the format is different than, for example, mastery of the subject matter, right? And should be accounted differently. And bias should be accounted differently from not making sense.
But the format, of course, you need to adhere to, and that's what I would implement through community moderation. You don't want to have that the moderators deal with that, because moderators have enough work as is. You're like, adhering to the format is the easy thing that people hopefully can agree on.
Absolutely.
If you say a claim is not a question, well, if people add questions as claims, that's something easily as a community you can find five people that have earned enough reputation, close it down, and
finding five people. Is that a problem? What about absentee landlords, or how do moderation issues get closed if you can't find five people?
Any five people, any five members, right?
Well, that has gained enough reputation to prove that they understand the format. That's the point of getting. If you don't, that's fine. Moderators step in.
And how do moderators know to step in?
How do they find out that there's this place on Stack Exchange that could use their help?
Well, so Stack Exchange filters like new content added by new users. You have like a queue, a review queue automatically. So that you know that new users that come in that don't understand the format are very likely to not adhere to it because nobody reads the tutorial, the introduction. So there's a queue of first post by new users. That's a primary one that you can look at, that you know it's very likely you'll need to give some guidance.
So you, as a moderator, you have your queue of stuff.
Not even, this is public stuff. Even the community as a whole has a review queue. And again, moderators only step in if the community, if that review queue, for example, is getting too long, then it's moderator's job to make sure it doesn't get too full. But all of that is public.
And why are I'm asking questions? I'm not being skeptical. I'm just trying to flush out how it works. Why do members of the community bother in the review queue? Are they trying to establish karma so that they could one day become moderators?
That's a good question. Why people care? Well, it unlocks badges. It's gamification. I don't know. I think the main reason why people
Stack Exchange.
Yeah,
specifically.
The main reason
There's a job.
Is because
Stack Exchange could be a resume for people. The more points you get, for some people, count as like a resume.
But you don't get points for
my numbers on.
Even before the
Okay.
jobs portal thing, like people contributed to Stack Overflow.
But you
Like,
don't
yes,
get
I think
points
that's
for,
a similar incentive as in Wikipedia, like just create something great together, I guess.
the main incentive why people keep doing it is because they care about the community, honestly. Like, people get sucked into the point system initially. Once you reach a certain threshold, people don't care anymore. That's when you get trusted accounts. It's not about the points, it's about you are participating in the community and you want that community to look healthy. If you have content that doesn't fit with the community, that's why you want to curate it, because you care about the community.
Actually, question, did that dynamic change when it became a job indicator?
It's not, as far as I know, it's not a job indicator whether you have 20K or 1,000 or 3,000. I mean, it's only, again, it's are you active in an open source community? Do you have some reputation? It's not about the degree of which, it's not a linear scale at all. So it's simply a cutoff point of, are you a professional that participates in online discussion about software or not? That's pretty much a cutoff point. At least that's how I look at CVs.
Fair enough.
We have around 15 minutes left. Maybe Tim can say something what he started in the curation channel. Something he didn't get across.
Well, there's a couple thoughts. I don't have any finished thoughts on any of this, and I guess first I'll repeat or state what the model was proposed in the white paper. And the white paper model was, I'm not going to actually think about this right now. It was me pushing it off to a later date. But for now, it would be like the first iteration, I assume, would be a centralized group of privileged curators, as the term is in the white paper, not moderators, because they don't moderate speakers. They organize, keep the debate organized, right? So they're not silencing people or whatever. The only exception I made for that is like spam attacks, things like that. So then you have this privileged group of people, and there's a question of who gets to have that privilege, right? That's something that is, you'd have to work your way up, and it could be through reputation points or training or something. And then the question was brought up earlier: who moderates the moderators? The idea being that when you go to the site or the system, you look at the debates as of current point in time, but the history is fully transparent and immutable, and so anybody could go back and look through history and see what changes have been made, and especially curation actions would be marked by who performed that curation. So essentially, it would be some kind of, it would be kind of like the way the US judicial system works, which is judges have absolute power over their scope, right, over their realm of influence. but there would be an impeachment process where people could say, hey, look at what this person has been doing. And a lot of the goal in that would be essentially that curation is a process that is orthogonal to debate, which means, and this is somewhat true in terms of maintaining Wikipedia content. You get people who are experts on the format, on the rules, and so on, and also on the heuristics and best practices, which if you're going to reorganize, what are the heuristics for when different arguments need to be grouped under an umbrella, or when two claims are considered identical, or when an argument should be moved. And they would be based on things that could almost be calculated, which is a separate discussion later at time. But let's just assume you could calculate relevance based on disambiguation and that sort of thing, right? If the conclusion does not match the argument in some way, the relevance would be down. And so moderation that would move an argument to something more relevant would be visible and something that could be calculated. But anyway, at some point, if it looks like somebody's not following the list of standards, that would get to initiate a process that could be proposed by the community of some kind of impeachment or review, right? So that was the white paper vision, and I would want to stick to that until I see something better, right? I think what is consistent with the end goal of the canonical debate, as I see it, is fully community moderated. But now we get into what I was talking about in the in Hangouts, which is or in the CD channel. One of the basic principles is the canonical debate shall not make decisions. And you know, the main point of this is it should not tell you what is the truth, who's right, right? One of the basic ideas around the design is you may even see that popular opinion thinks something is right, but you can state your own beliefs and see what's right according to your own beliefs in scoring, and always have a way to see it from your perspective, right? So there's no moment where the system decides you're wrong, right? Popular opinion is just one way to look at this debate. So
there might be a couple actually, like there might be.
There'd be multiple scoring. Yeah, there'd be lots.
I think to give one concrete example, when the system might tell you you're wrong, do you imagine that you can say that as a person that you think that a claim is true and its negation is true as well? Do you want to allow that in the system, or is that something you want to disallow?
In my opinion, that is not possible through the interface, right?
Yeah, but then you disallow it. So you're telling the user you're wrong. You cannot believe both.
No. But you're not wrong. Like it would be moot because there's no way to vote separately on the claim and its negation. Automatically, the system says your vote on that is the opposite of your vote on the negation, right? So I mean, the system could tell you where you're contradicting yourself, and that's an important feature, right? You know, I believe freedom is the most important thing, but we need to tell people to stay at home so that they don't catch a disease. You're contradicting yourself there, and how do you reconcile that? Okay, that's a separate thing. So now let's bring this to moderation, which is what I was trying to get at. Each of these curation actions, including accepting a new claim, if we want to put some sort of gateway on somebody makes a new claim and it's crappy, and we found through practice that it's better to say have several members of the community approve it before it becomes visible to everyone. That's possible, right? Those decisions, those are decision points. There's a trigger, there's a point where the system is saying, this is now the way it is, right? And so my question is that a quote unquote decision that the system's not supposed to be making? in some ways I see it as yes, and in other ways I see it as no. I mean, if the moderation method is to debate about it and have arguments pro and con about, well, should we move this over to there, yes or no, and let's debate about it. At some point, you need a trigger that does the move, right? And so at some point, someone's won that debate. Okay, that makes me a little uncomfortable. Not much, but a little.
It actually begs the question whether or not, because it is orthogonal. We seem to all agree discussions like that should be orthogonal. Maybe we don't want to model it as an argument. Maybe. Possibly,
right. But then I would say you don't want debate with pros and cons. We'd have to look at that. Every time I think about it, I don't really think of it as using the same structure. Okay. So I agree with that. The one concept that I wanted to try to demonstrate, but I didn't have time, but I think you'll understand just by talking through it is, you know, a lot of these, well, with scoring and with showing the debate from a perspective of truth, right? There's like, let's say the default view. Let's say you haven't expressed any opinions and you come into the system and you're going to look at a claim and its pros and cons. What does the system show you? One of the design goals that I have stated, we haven't discussed, but you know, is, you know, it should be quick and easy to understand the main, right? I mean, we've discussed that part, and what that entails is somehow the best arguments are at the top, right? But how do you decide what are the best arguments? That's a decision that the system would have to make, that the system shall not make. So you would have to use some sort of metrics to choose what to put on top in a way that makes the thing readable. You may have hundreds of crappy arguments down at the bottom because we don't want to hide any arguments. And yet you want the best stuff to be on top. So scoring seems to serve that purpose, where the highest scored arguments in terms of relevance versus truth should be at the top. But we know that that is something the system doesn't decide. So you come into the system and you should be able to state what are the best arguments to you, and those float to the top. What is this? But the system doesn't know when you first come in, and so does it use the popular vote? Perhaps. Maybe the popular vote becomes what's floated on top until you start putting your own things. But as you change your score, you can see how that starts to move around your view of the debate, and especially as you roll up and down from things. Now, I tried to apply this mental activity to curation. It seems to work when you're choosing what is the best text for a claim, the best way to say a claim. That seems compatible. You can have some sort of voting, and your own personal preference of how to see it floats to the top, unless you want to see what other people think. Okay, but what about if two claims are identical and you want to merge them? You could say, okay, as soon as I agree with that merge, from now on, whenever I see the debate, I see it merged. But then you have a problem, which is, what if you don't agree? Are people who don't agree going to be adding their arguments to one and separate arguments to another? That seems like a very confusing model to try to maintain in parallel. It's forking, and it's a kind of chaotic forking. But that's kind of the thought process that I was trying to go through in terms of what kind of curation could be handled like the rest of the canonical debate, and what parts need just some sort of cutoff. Now, this is the way it is from now on.
Well, perhaps that's a question to end on.
It is a very, very good thought exercise. I agree, because to some degree, curation is a debate, but the main difference I see is you need to enact, you need to make a conclusion, right?
And if you don't agree, it's basically rejected. It's in limbo before of neither being accepted or rejected, so it's rejected. basically.
I can head off as well. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye, Josh.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Um,
For next time, perhaps we should start with some like concrete examples, or
we can do
to
that.
discuss.
I thought next time would be good to start maybe with Visaurus. We didn't have time for that today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, perhaps concrete examples in the context of Visaurus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I posted sort of the simple moderation edit flow, the last conversation after, which is sort of the first thing we're implementing. The main distinction there be between editing a claim, like just the context of the claim, where it's understood as a community guideline that you're not changing the intent of a claim, and then forking was sort of like the other alternative, right? So perhaps that's a good one to start on. Like the first one at least seems uncontroversial.
Yeah.
One other thing I'll throw in, and I don't know if it'll be ready, is I had homework to do from the discussion on curation, our last discussion that we had that was kind of around this topic. So, if I manage to get my act together and list out and organize that set of actions, it would also be a good thing to discuss in one of these meetings in terms of which apply better to which kinds of moderation.
Yeah, sounds good. So like as soon as you have something, we can put that on the agenda. For you two guys, how is it? Is it Monday or Wednesday? What do you prefer as a regular call?
Either is fine.
Okay, so then it's Wednesday.
Cool.
So not this Wednesday,
Okay.
I guess, but then next week.
Cool.
Okay. Then,
Thanks, Felix.
Sounds good. Take it
thank
easy.
you. Bye.
Bye.